In today's Farm Report, countries are banning poultry products from parts or all of the United States due to the detection of avian influenza. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
A growing list of countries are restricting imports of poultry from all or part of the United States due to the discovery of avian flu infections in backyard flocks in Washington and Oregon last month, according to USDA veterinarian John Clifford.
4 countries to date have shut off the U.S. poultry to fresh and frozen, as well as day-old chicks and hatching eggs. So it really stops all movement of live poultry, as well as all other fresh and frozen products of poultry to countries that have shut us off.
The 4 countries that have banned all U.S. poultry are Sri Lanka, South Korea, Thailand, and China. But Clifford says there are many others that are only restricting poultry from areas in the United States where highly pathogenic avian influenza has been identified.
A lot of countries have taken appropriate action. Japan, for example. Mexico has been a good partner here and not taken any action against the U.S. on this. Canada has taken appropriate action. In fact, we have an agreement the way we treat each other with Canada. We have an agreement with Japan. We're trying to encourage other countries like South Korea to take a look at that plan and see if they would be willing to adopt a similar plan with the U.S. as well. Regionalization type plan. So that's what Japan has done. They've regionalized the U.S. And in fact, we'll also say the European community has regionalized the U.S., and that went into effect on January the 13th, where they restricted the state of Washington and one county in the state of Oregon.
While U.S. poultry exports to China are relatively small compared to countries like Mexico and Canada, American Farm Bureau Federation President Bob Stallman says China's ban on U.S. poultry and egg imports is a clear violation of international trade rules and is simply unwarranted.
We believe it's certainly inconsistent with international trade rules for a country to put in these wide bans based on, in this case, the incidence of bird flu in not even in a production area, from wild birds. And that's overkill, and it's beyond the pale, and we think they should be held to task, and I'm hoping that our government can convince China that they have overreacted and for them to basically honor their international trade obligations.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
A plea from a former mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, to all current mayors.
Help us bring down the walls between this urban-rural divide that's happened in this country.
Anthony Fox, now the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, speaking to the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Washington, D.C.
There is urban poverty and rural poverty. Access issues in urban America and rural America.
He urged urban city officials to reach out to their nearby rural counterparts to work together on those common problems. On stage with Fox, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, he said federal programs from almost all departments span both urban and rural areas in some way. For example, more people are wanting to grow food inside cities, and so
we have microloans for folks who want to get started in a city. We can provide resources to cities to establish farmers markets or food hubs to aggregate locally produced food.
Plus, USDA runs most of the nutrition assistance programs and helps cities bring fresh produce into inner city areas that never had access to it before. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Many voices are heard during the biofuels debate, whether it be from advocacy groups for and against, and now it includes some former lawmakers. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
A former governor, a former congressman, and a former senator discussed biofuels policy and the need to diversify the fuel supply during the National Biodiesel Conference this week in Fort Worth. Former Missouri Governor Matt Blunt now serves as president of the American Automotive Policy Council.
It's essential that the auto industry and government stakeholders continue to work collaboratively to ensure that the diversification of the U.S. transportation fuel supply occurs in a manner that is technologically and economically feasible and in no way harms our consumers. I certainly want to applaud your industry for working very closely with engine manufacturers and focusing on fuel quality and supply chain management to avoid some of the potential challenges that we could have as more biodiesel enters the market. Diversification of the transportation fuel supply in our country is an important national public policy goal and one I know we all fully embrace.
Former North Dakota Senator Byron Dorgan helped craft the renewable fuel standard and now is an energy policy advisor. And he expressed his opinion on the EPA's inability to approve volume requirements for the RFS in 2014.
It suggests to me that there is not a minimum threshold of embarrassment. This is really pretty unbelievable. You know, I helped write the renewable fuel standard in 2005 and then again in 2007, and we did it for a very specific reason. And then the current president even campaigned on it, was involved in the biodiesel piece in 2007. It's inexplicable to me that they can't make decisions we would have expected them to make, especially with a program that should be celebrating success.
Former Congressman Kenny Holshoff of Missouri, who's now a public policy expert with a major law firm, stressed the need for grassroots action in the biofuels industry.
When you consider who's on the other side of these fights and the deep-pocketed money interests that we're taking on, and yet we are still in the ball game, even though the EPA was getting ready to cut us off at the knees at 1.28 billion gallons, and yet we are still in the game, and we are still going to pursue this. But the fact is that you all have to help us. I mean, the only way that we can continue to stay in the game is this broad-based coalition that you've put together.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
It was not a report that was especially unexpected.
Agriculture Department livestock analyst Shale Chatham talking about Friday's USDA report on cattle feedlot activity, showing producers placed into feedlots during December 8% fewer animals than December 2013. That might have been less than some had expected. Marketing's out of feedlots down 5%, leaving feedlots on January 1st with about 1% more cattle than January of 2014. The interesting numbers were deep in the report, looking at the inventory by sex.
And the number of heifers and heifer calves on feed on the 1st of January was just under 3.7 million head, which was about 2% below the prior year.
And if you look at the percentage of heifers compared to the entire inventory,
it was just over 34% compared to 35% the previous year.
And you know what that might mean.
Producers may be holding heifers back for addition to the breeding herd.
Either way, everything points to continued lower cattle numbers for a while.
And continued tightening of beef supplies.
And yes, continued higher cattle prices. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The University of Minnesota Extension Service Office is hosting several meetings. Dan Martins with the University of Minnesota Extension shares what they're going to be doing this week.
First today, a Farm Bill meeting reminder. FSA and Extension staff will conduct an extra Farm Bill meeting in central Minnesota at the Freeport Community Center on Tuesday, January 27, starting at 9:30 a.m. and running until about noon. No registration is needed. If you'd like to hear a live discussion and ask some questions, take a look at your day on Tuesday, January 27 at the Freeport Community Center, 9:30 a.m. The next closest site for one of the extra meetings will be at Fergus Falls on Thursday, February 5th at 9:30 a.m. at the Bigwood Event Center. Other sites a little farther away include Marshall, Rochester, Mankato, Crookston, and the St. Paul campus. This week I'm working with pesticide applicator workshops in Little Falls at the Morrison County Government Center on Tuesday, January 27, and at Holdingford City Hall on Thursday, January 29. Both of these run from 10:30 to 2:30, and you can pack a lunch or bring $5 for some pizza. I talked recently about the Central Minnesota Winter Forage Workshop called Tour de Forage that will be held this year at the El Paso Sports Bar and Grill at St. Joseph on Wednesday, February 4, located along Highway 25 on the west side of St. Joe. That's Wednesday next week. The original early registration date with a $5 discount has been extended to January 29. Registration will be $30 at the door on February 4. This workshop will start with registration at 9:30 a.m., with the program starting at 10 and adjourning by 3 p.m. Topics planned for the morning include using UAVs or drones in forage production by Michael Dunn from Inez Consulting, low lignin alfalfa, a new quality opportunity by Craig Schaefer, University of Minnesota, report on project work by the Central Minnesota Forage Council and the Midwest Forage Association, and meeting the sponsors. The lunch break provides time to visit with the exhibitors, speakers, and neighbors. Afternoon topics include a research update on nitrogen management for corn following alfalfa by Jeff Coulter, U of M corn agronomist, soil fertility for forage yield and quality by Dan Kaiser, U of M Extension Soil Science. Alternative and Emergency Forage Options by Reagan Nolan, U of M agronomy grad student. You can help with meal planning by pre-registering. Call the Midwest Forage office at 651-484-3888 or do a website search for Midwest Forage Association. You're welcome to call me with questions about this at 968-5077 if a local call to Foley, or 1-800-964-4929. Thanks to AgStar Financial Services and Central Minnesota Credit Union for extra help with this meeting, along with regular Midwest Forage Association sponsors. I'm Dan Martins with U of M Extension, and I hope your week is starting well.
We will likely see just about the same amount of food price inflation this year as we did last. This from Agriculture Department economist Anne Marie Coons. In 2014, the food price index went up 2.4%, and for this year,
we're expecting food prices at the grocery store to rise 2 to 3%.
And the midpoint of that would be about the same as last year. However, there will be some foods whose price tags will likely increase by more than that, beef being one of them. Now, last year, those prices went up 12%. Kuhn says this year, beef will go up again, maybe only at about half that rate, but more than had been expected for this year.
We're expecting beef and veal prices to rise 5 to 6%, which is an adjustment we've made upwards. So last month we were predicting 4.5 to 5.5%, but we've still just seen cattle prices rising at the farm level as we're still seeing the effect of lower herd sizes in the U.S.
However, pork that went up 9% last year could actually cost less this year by as much as 3%. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.